Imagine a small leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age, hidden away on a library shelf. Inside are hundreds of pages of indecipherable writing. Strange symbols dance across each page in neat lines, but no one can read a single word. This isn't the Voynich manuscript, but rather the much lesser known but equally mysterious Rohank Codex. The Rohank Codex first came to light in Hungary in the 19th century. In 1838, a Hungarian count named Gustav Bathany donated his entire library to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, and among his books was this puzzling codex. The manuscript had been kept in the town of Rohank, now Rechnitz in Austria, but little else is known of its past. It essentially appeared out of nowhere, with no author, no title, and no explanation, just a book of unknown symbols waiting to be understood. Today, the codex is stored in the Hungarian Academy's library in Budapest, where only a few scholars have ever been permitted to examine the fragile original. Physically, the codex is small in size but extraordinary in content. It contains 448 paper pages with roughly 9 to 14 lines of symbols per page. The text appears to run right to left and is neatly justified at the right margin. In between the dense lines of script are 87 illustrations depicting various scenes. The drawings mix Christian crosses, Islamic crescents, and potentially pagan sun symbols in their imagery. As for the script itself, it features nearly 800 distinct characters, far more than any known alphabet. Some symbols appear frequently, others only once or twice, leaving researchers to wonder if this is a complex cipher or an unknown language. Notably, there is one additional forensic clue about the origin of the mysterious book. The paper carries an Italian watermark from the 1530s, hinting that the codex, or at least its paper, originated in the 16th century. From the start, people questioned whether the Rohank Codex was authentic or a forgery. One theory holds that it's an elaborate hoax concocted in the late 18th or early 19th century. According to some historians, Samuel Nemes, a notorious Hungarian forger active in the 1830s, might have created the codex to fool collectors. Nemes had a reputation for producing a small quantity of fake documents and bundling them into real collections of legitimate antiquities. Bundling documents that he forged himself with legitimate bundles both raised the price of the bundled documents and gave the forgeries the air of legitimacy, since everything else was real. And honestly, that's a pretty ingenious way to make some additional cash if you're light on ethics and heavy on knowledge of antiquities. Since the codex surfaced around that same time, many Hungarian experts still lean toward the hoax explanation. However, no proof of Nemes's involvement has ever been found, and intriguingly, a catalog entry from 1743 may have listed this very volume among a count's prayer books. If that entry indeed referred to the Rohank Codex, then the manuscript existed decades before the proposed forger was even born. Further, even those who are skeptical about the authenticity of the Codex admit that it is a vast and apparently rule-bound system. This seems unlikely in the event that it was a simple forgery. On the other hand, plenty of researchers argue the Rohank Codex is a genuine text, just written in a code or language we don't recognize. Analysts have found repeating patterns and orderly sequences in the symbols, suggesting it encodes meaningful information. Studies in the late 20th century confirmed the script's direction and identified clusters that look like intentional words or numbers. The text lacks certain markers such as the grammatical endings you would expect in normal Hungarian. According to those who believe this is a real document, this indicates that it likely isn't of Hungarian origin. Notably, many so-called translations of the Rohank Codex have been released over the years, all of which have fallen apart under scrutiny. In 1996, Hungarian scholar Attila Nyiri proposed a Sumerian-Hungarian connection. And yeah, if that wasn't enough of a giveaway, this quote-unquote translation would go off the rails very quickly. His method involved turning the pages upside down, identifying one symbol as a Sumerian glyph, and then assigning Latin letters to the other symbols based on loose visual resemblance. His approach was widely condemned as arbitrary because he would change the letter assigned to a symbol whenever it was convenient to make a Hungarian word appear. Basically, he was engaging in a classic case of forcing the data to fit the theory. Further, scholars pointed out that there was no apparent connection between ancient Sumerians and Hungarian people. Instead, Attila Nyiri had essentially engaged in a nationalistic interpretation of this ancient codex, a theme which we will see continue with the next translation attempt as well. A few years later, in 2002, a Romanian academic named Viorica Enicic published her own quote-unquote translation. She claimed the text was written in a vulgar Latin dialect from ancient Dacia and was to be read right to left and, bizarrely, from the bottom of the page to the top. On the bright side, at least she didn't need to flip the page upside down, or place it on a dog's snout, or do an interpretive dance before reading the text. Her translation produced a dramatic narrative of early 12th century Romanian people fighting against Hungarians and nomadic horse lords. However, her work was dismissed for the same reasons as the previous one. The translation was inconsistent, destroying the original text's patterns, and the resulting story had no discernible connection to the codex's own illustrations. It was essentially a Rohank Codex-derived historical fiction that seemed to carry significant nationalist overtones. In stark contrast to these speculative translations, modern research has taken a more systematic approach. At present, a team of Hungarian scholars is working on decoding the book. They've argued that the codex is not written in a natural language with a simple cipher, but is instead a more complex code system. They propose the text as a Catholic reader, containing paraphrases of New Testament stories about Jesus, written around 1593, in a deliberately constructed artificial language. This theory explains both the script's regularity and its stubborn resistance to decipherment. Building off this idea, one historian has suggested the script could be a transcription of a monastic language developed solely within one monastery. In communities that had taken a vow of silence, like the Trappist or Cistercian orders, monks developed complex sign languages to communicate while maintaining silence. Today, the Rohank Codex remains what it has always been, a book that refuses to be read. We know its paper is from 16th century Italy, and we're sure it reads from right to left. We know its script is complex and rule-based and not simply gibberish tossed on the page. We also know that every attempt at a simple translation has failed. The path forward likely lies with modern technology and human researchers working in concert to crack this unusual code and finally answer what the codex says. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to like and subscribe and to share this video. Also, don't forget to check out my other channels if you're into more generalized mystery content or true crime content. In the late summer of 1848, the British warship HMS Daedalus was en route from the Cape of Good Hope toward St. Helena in the South Atlantic. On August 6, 1848, roughly 300 miles off the coast of modern-day Namibia, sailors aboard the Daedalus spotted an astonishing sea serpent gliding through the waves. According to the captain and his officers, the creature held about 4 feet of its head and neck above the water, with an estimated 60 feet or more of its body trailing on the surface. Combining these observations, they approximated the creature's total length at up to 100 feet. The head was described as long, pointed, and flattened on top, with a dark brown coloration and a lighter, yellowish-white throat area. Notably, the crew saw no ordinary whale fins or flippers, but instead, they reported a peculiar feature along the back, like a shaggy mane or a trail of seaweed atop the body. The animal moved steadily at about 12 to 15 miles per hour, maintaining a straight course even in a choppy sea. It occasionally dipped under waves, but showed no obvious sign of the spouting or surfacing behavior typical of whales. Hundreds of crew members watched the creature in astonishment for a considerable time, with some estimating it remained visible for up to 20 minutes. The captain emphasized how close the creature came, saying that it was near enough that he claimed he could have recognized a person's features at that distance. One lieutenant, Edgar Drummond, sketched the scene and described a long, snake-like form with a dorsal fin about 20 feet behind the head, and perhaps a tail fin further back. Whatever it was, the men of the Daedalus knew they had witnessed something highly unusual. When HMS Daedalus returned to England in the fall of 1848, the captain filed an official report to the Admiralty describing the encounter. Before long, news of the sea serpent leaked to the press, sparking a Victorian-era sensation. The London Times published the report on October 10, 1848, giving readers a vivid account of an enormous serpent seen by Royal Navy officers. The public's imagination was captivated. Here was testimony of a sea monster from a highly credible source. The fact that experienced naval officers, the Daedalus had around 300 men, were willing to stake their reputations on the sighting lent the story instant credibility. Many considered the witnesses, disciplined men familiar with the sea, with some trained in natural science, to be reliable observers, which gave pause even to skeptics. However, not everyone accepted the tale at face value. The scientific community and naval authorities reacted with skepticism and concern. The Times sought a prosaic explanation, and Sir Richard Owen, a renowned biologist, stepped forward to debunk the sighting. Owen asserted that the crew had seen not a serpent, but a large marine mammal, likely an elephant seal, whose appearance misled them. He argued that the reported long tail was nothing more than a trail of disturbed water following the creature as it swam. The captain vehemently rejected Owen's explanation. He fired back in the press, insisting that neither he nor his officers could mistake an elephant seal, or any known creature, for what they saw. To them, the suggestion was absurd, given how close and clear their view had been, and the public debate grew heated. Some sided with the captain, convinced that the ocean harbored at least one species of gigantic unknown animal, while others agreed with Owen's interpretation. Unsurprisingly, the Admiralty wasn't amused by the spectacle and all the attention generated by the incident. The affair even reached Parliament, where officials questioned the judgment of naval officers who promoted apparent monster sightings in the media. An inquiry was held into how the captain's report got published, and the Navy felt some embarrassment at the situation. In spite of this official disapproval, the captain stood by his story. He even cooperated with the Illustrated London News to publish engraved illustrations of the creature based on the crew's testimony. The dramatic images, printed in late October 1848, grabbed public attention even further and were reprinted across the world. These illustrations, essentially the Victorian equivalent of viral photographs, cemented the Daedalus sea serpent as one of the era's most famous maritime mysteries. The HMS Daedalus incident has continued to fascinate researchers, skeptics, and maritime historians to this day. With the benefit of hindsight, many have tried to pin down what exactly the crew saw. Over the years, several explanations have been put forward. A prevailing view is that the Daedalus crew encountered a known creature under unusual conditions. Owen's own theory that it was a large seal was one early example of this approach. However, the seal hypothesis itself is now largely dismissed as not fitting with the significant eyewitness evidence. In modern times, the leading explanation is a type of whale. In 2015, for instance, biologist Gary Galbraith argued that a rare whale, called a sei whale, best fits the description. A sei whale feeding near the surface can present a long, dark back with a pointed head and pale underside, much like the creature described. The reported dorsal fin position, roughly 20 feet behind the head, also matches a sei whale's anatomy. Notably, the initial sketches of the creature depict it in a much less serpentine way, while subsequent sketches were sensationalized substantially. Some suggest that the crew might have been fooled by an optical illusion or a combination of mundane things appearing as one. Rough seas, reflections, or floating debris can sometimes trick observers. Others have suggested that it may have been a group of whales or dolphins that the observers incorrectly viewed as a single entity. However, given the length of the sighting and the number of witnesses, a purely illusionary scenario seems unlikely in this case. The mid-19th century did see a few hoaxes related to sea monsters, and some modern observers have tried to fit this incident into that narrative. However, nothing about the Daedalus case suggests a hoax by its crew. The officers had no clear motive to lie, and in fact they risked and received significant ridicule and professional backlash by coming forward. While newspapers may have exaggerated certain details for effect, the core testimony appears sincere. Personally, I see no reason whatsoever for the crew to lie about this encounter, and the idea that the entire ship could be brought on board for a weird sea serpent hoax seems highly unlikely. Another possibility considered is that the Daedalus encounter was with an unknown or subsequently extinct species. Fans of this theory have hailed this incident as one of the best pieces of evidence for an uncatalogued sea monster. Speculations have included a surviving plesiosaur, an immense marine snake or eel, or even an undiscovered giant squid. To date, however, no tangible evidence has ever emerged to support the existence of such creatures. Others believe it may be a creature that went extinct in the subsequent years, but no evidence exists for this being the case. More than 175 years later, the Daedalus sea serpent encounter remains a fascinating unsolved mystery. In hindsight, the most plausible conclusion is that the crew did see a real animal, but misinterpreted its appearance. However, with no physical proof and only the crew's reports, there's significant room for speculation. What is certain is that this is one of the best documented sea serpent sightings ever, and it made a lasting impact on both popular imagination and scientific debate. In late 1809, as the Napoleonic Wars ravaged Europe, a 25-year-old British diplomat named Benjamin Bathurst set out on a tense journey home. Bathurst was the well-connected son of a bishop, and already a seasoned envoy despite his age. He had just left Vienna, where he'd tried in vain to draw Austria into an alliance against Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, with Austria defeated, Bathurst feared French spies were on his trail. Disguised as a humble merchant and traveling under a false name, he planned to slip north through Prussia to the port of Hamburg and sail back to England. It was a risky route. The roads were crawling with bandits and stray soldiers, and every town posed new dangers for a lone British envoy behind enemy lines. On the evening of November 25, 1809, Bathurst's carriage halted at the Prussian town of Perleberg for a brief rest. He and his courier, a man named Herr Kraus, had dinner at the White Swan Inn, while fresh horses were being readied for the next leg of their trip. Bathurst was cautious. He had decided to depart under cover of darkness, hoping the night would cloak his passage. Ever on edge, he peered into the gloom and was wary of every flicker of shadow around the inn yard. At around 9 p.m., with the carriage waiting in the lamplit courtyard, Bathurst donned his heavy fur coat and stepped outside. Witnesses later recalled seeing him walk around to the front of his horses, perhaps to inspect the team or speak to the carriage driver. In that fleeting moment, the young diplomat vanished. When Krauss emerged moments later, there was no sign of Bathurst anywhere. One moment Bathurst was there beside the horses, the next he had melted into the shadows without a sound. Local authorities were notified, but in the chaos of Napoleonic-era Prussia, a missing traveler raised little alarm at first. However, when the Prussians, who were officially neutral at this point, learned that the man wasn't a merchant, but a British diplomat, this caught the attention of the local authorities. By the next day, Captain Friedrich von Klitzing had soldiers dragging the nearby river and combing Perleberg for any trace of the Englishman. Their search soon turned up disturbing clues. Bathurst's fur-lined cloak was found hidden in a stable behind a house owned by an inn worker. 2 weeks later, a pair of his trousers surfaced in the woods outside town. Oddly, the pants had strange holes in them and contained papers including a letter to Bathurst's wife, but there were no bloodstains. It looked like someone had fired shots through the clothing after removing it, perhaps to fake a violent ambush. Suspicion ended up falling on a member of the inn's staff, August Schmidt. He was caught with the missing coat and promptly arrested, but no body or weapon was found, and he was eventually released without charges. And I just have to mention it here, but this expensive coat was found in an outhouse owned by the Schmidt family. So yeah, sometimes the comedy just writes itself, doesn't it? Desperate for answers, Bathurst's wife, Phillida, traveled to Prussia and even secured an audience with Napoleon Bonaparte to ask if he knew of her husband's fate. Napoleon solemnly denied any French involvement, and indeed no hard evidence ever tied French agents to the disappearance. The Prussian king and British government posted hefty rewards for information, yet every lead turned cold. As the winter of 1809 wore on, Benjamin Bathurst had effectively vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions. In the absence of a definitive answer, numerous theories emerged to explain his disappearance. The simplest and most mundane explanation is that Bathurst was robbed and slain by opportunists. He was traveling with conspicuous wealth, a fine coat, jewelry, money, through an area that had been impoverished by war. It's easy to imagine him stepping away from the inn's lights and being ambushed in the darkness by thieves. The suspicious conduct of the inn's employees and the fact that the wealth seems to have been distributed amongst them supports this idea. The fact that he wasn't openly traveling as a diplomat also lends some additional credibility to the theory. I imagine the inn staff would have seen a wealthy merchant as much easier pickings than an influential and well-connected British diplomat on official business on the continent. But guys, I'm going to dox myself a bit here. I'm not a Prussian waiter at an inn circa the Napoleonic era, so this is just speculation on my part. I know some of you are probably shocked right now, but yeah, I just got to speak my truth. Years later, in 1852, workers demolishing a nearby building discovered a human skeleton buried under a threshold, the skull split by a heavy blow. Many believed that Bathurst had finally been found, though at the time there was no way to prove this was him, and the evidence wasn't preserved. At the time, public opinion favored a more conspiratorial view, that Bathurst was the victim of an attack by French agents. As a British envoy working against Napoleon, he could have been targeted. British newspapers loudly accused Napoleon's spies of abducting Bathurst, suggesting he'd been seized and quietly eliminated on official orders. The French government angrily refuted these charges, instead insinuating that Bathurst had gone insane. The French government further accused the British diplomatic service of routinely employing people who are in poor mental health. They even released an official statement saying that the British diplomatic service is well known worldwide for employing madmen, which I suppose passed for 19th century French banter. Despite extensive diplomatic inquiries, no proof ever emerged that France captured or in any other way interfered with Bathurst. As I mentioned earlier, Napoleon personally guaranteed to Bathurst's wife that Bathurst hadn't been harmed by French agents. Given the context at the time, this didn't satisfy many in Britain. However, these inquiries were raised again after Napoleon's fall, and again officials denied all involvement in the disappearance. Further, historians find it highly unlikely that Napoleon would have ordered a diplomat to be abducted and slain. The reasoning for this is grounded in practicality. All sides in any conflict know that diplomats are necessary, and neither side wishes to have their people treated in such a way. Another theory suggests that Bathurst took the opportunity to leave his life behind and live on the continent. Under intense stress and fearing for his life, it's possible he suffered a mental breakdown or decided to desert his mission. Friends noted that in his final days, he was extremely anxious, even paranoid, about being followed. Indeed, the letter Bathurst left for his wife, recovered from his abandoned trousers, was reportedly disjointed and desperate, as if he felt surrounded by enemies. Perhaps he lost his nerve and fled into hiding. One rumor claimed that an unidentified Englishman fitting Bathurst's description turned up in a Baltic port that winter, refusing to give his name, and boarded a ship for Sweden. According to this unverified narrative, the vessel sank in a storm. Despite the intense stress he was under, most experts agree that there's simply no indication that he chose to willingly run off. Notably, in modern times, the story of Benjamin Bathurst has found new life, with an infusion of paranormal influence. Given that he disappeared under such bizarre circumstances, some have speculated that he may have slipped through time. That said, ultimately, there's no indication that such an event ever occurred. Over 2 centuries later, the disappearance of Benjamin Bathurst remains an enduring mystery. The most likely conclusion, that he was slain by local robbers in Prussia, is also the least sensational, but it fits best with the sparse facts we have. Yet without definitive proof or witnesses, absolute certainty has eluded all investigations. No culprit was ever identified, and no grave was ever officially confirmed. The Sankabetsu brown bear incident of December 1915 stands as the worst animal attack in Japan's recorded history. Notably in Japanese, this event has gone on to be known, in translation, as the Brown Bear Storm, indicating the ferocity of the ursine onslaught which occurred. Over the course of 6 days in a remote Hokkaido settlement, a single male Usuri brown bear terrorized villagers, slaying 7 people and injuring 3 others. Sankabetsu in 1915 was a newly settled pioneer hamlet in Hokkaido's rugged interior. Few people lived there, and the area's forests were habitat to Hokkaido's native brown bears. Encounters with wildlife were common on the frontier, especially as settlers cleared land and bears foraged near farms. In mid-November 1915, local farmer Ikeda Tomizo and his family had their first run-in with a large male brown bear. At dawn one morning, the bear appeared at the Ikeda homestead, startling the family horse. The bear stole some harvested corn, but fled back into the woods when confronted. Recognizing the potential danger to people and livestock, Ikeda and a group of experienced bear hunters kept watch for the bear's return. The bear did return on November 30th, and the hunters shot at it, wounding the animal but failing to bring it down. They tracked blood trails toward the mountains until a snowstorm forced them to turn back. Believing a wounded bear would likely avoid further human contact, the villagers hoped the threat had passed. Unfortunately for the locals, they were mistaken, and this wounded bear was about to strike back in a big way. On the morning of December 9th, 1915, the large brown bear suddenly appeared at the Ota family's house, the first in a series of deadly incursions. Inside were Abe Mayu, a farmer's wife, and an infant named Hasumi Mikio, whom she was babysitting. The bear burst into the house and mauled the baby with furious anger. Mayu fought back desperately. It said she threw firewood at the bear and then tried to flee. The enraged bear easily overtook Mayu, mauling her, and dragged her off into the surrounding forest. When other villagers arrived at the scene, they found a horrific sight. Blood pooled on the floorboards of the house, described by witnesses as resembling a slaughterhouse. News of the attack spread quickly through the settlement. By that evening, armed villagers gathered at the Ota home, fearing the bear would return. Around 8 p.m., the bear indeed crept back to the Ota property under cover of darkness. The men on guard were tense and panicked at the bear's reappearance. One villager managed a panicked shot, but the bear slipped away into the night before the hastily organized militia could bring it down. In the early pre-dawn hours of December 10th, a search party of about 30 men ventured into the woods to find the bear and recover Mayu's body. They found a disturbing scene. The bear had stashed Mayu's remains under the snow near a fir tree, apparently to preserve the meat for later consumption. This discovery confirmed their worst fear. The bear was actively treating humans as prey. The group pressed on and soon encountered the bear, still very close to the village. 5 men opened fire, and 1 bullet struck the bear, causing it to retreat with a wound. That night, the worst came to pass. Many women and children from the area had sought refuge at the home of the Miyuke family, considered safer because it was being guarded by armed men after the prior day's attack. Miyuke Yao was there with her children, as were members of the neighboring Saito family. Most of the guards, however, had rushed off upon news that the bear was seen back at the Ota farm that evening, leaving the Miyuke house virtually unprotected. Sometime late on December 10th, the bear silently approached the Miyuke homestead. Yao, carrying her infant son Umakichi on her back, heard a rumble outside. Before she could react, the bear smashed through a window into the house. The disturbance upset the hearth. The cooking pot overturned and doused the fire, and the only oil lamp was knocked over, plunging the crowded home into darkness. Yao tried to flee with her children, but her young son Yujiro clung to her legs in terror, tripping her as they ran. The bear seized Yao, biting into Umakichi as well. One guard, Odo, had remained near the Miyuke house. He bravely intervened, drawing the bear's attention. The bear dropped Yao and her baby to attack Odo, clawing his back as he tried to hide behind furniture. Yao managed to gather some of her children and escape into the night, despite serious head wounds. Inside the house, the enraged bear then turned to the other occupants. The animal mauled 3-year-old Miyuke Kinzo and 6-year-old Saito Haruyoshi, ending them both. It also bit another child, Saito Iwao, severely injuring him. Next, the bear set upon Take Saito, a woman who was 8 months pregnant. And for the sake of everyone watching, I'm going to leave what happened next to your imagination. Outside, Yao, badly injured but alive, encountered the returning guardsmen and alerted them to the carnage at her home. When the rescuers arrived, they heard the bear still snarling and smashing inside the dark house. Assuming no one could have survived, some proposed burning the house down to incinerate the bear. However, Yao, holding out hope that some of the little ones were alive, thankfully forbade it. Instead, the men devised a plan. They split into two teams, one at the front door and one at the back of the house. The rear team created a diversion of noise, shouting and rattling weapons, to flush the bear out the front. As expected, the bear burst out the front door. But in the confusion, one guard's rifle misfired, and others hesitated for fear of hitting their comrades. Amid the chaos, the bear barreled past the line of men and vanished once more into the forest. Entering the house by torchlight, the villagers beheld a scene of utter horror. In 2 nights, 6 people had been ended, and several others gravely wounded. The survivors and other townsfolk, fearing the bear's return yet again, gathered at the local school for shelter. At this point, many of Sankabetsu's residents were convinced they were dealing with a demon bear, not a normal animal, given its relentlessness, brutality, and level of cunning. By December 11th, news of the incident had reached authorities. Local officials sent out a group of experienced hunters and trackers to bring the bear in, including a locally renowned elite bear hunter. One extremely controversial idea was to use a victim's corpse as bait to lure the creature into a trap, since the bear had dragged off bodies before. This proposal was understandably met with outrage by the bereaved families, and was ultimately abandoned after an attempt failed to draw the bear out of hiding. For 2 days, the bear eluded search parties, though it did raid empty houses for winter food stores, as evidenced by ransacked provisions. On the night of December 13th, hunters thought they spotted a moving shadow near an ice bridge checkpoint and opened fire. They later found bear tracks and drops of blood, suggesting the demon bear had been wounded once more, but that he continued to prowl the area. By the morning of December 14th, heavy snow was imminent, threatening to erase the bear's tracks. The hunting team knew this might be their last chance before winter storms. An elite hunter and a local guide set off into the forest to track the bear immediately, choosing to move as a pair for speed and stealth rather than as a larger group. This was dangerous, but having too large a party would potentially alert the bear. Before long, they found the bear peacefully resting near a Japanese oak tree. The hunter got within 60 feet and took careful aim before he started blasting. His first shot hit the bear's heart, and a second shot struck its head, finally bringing the great beast down for good. In the aftermath, the bear's size and condition were noted with astonishment. It weighed about 750 pounds and measured almost 9 feet tall, enormous for an Ussuri brown bear, indicating a healthy adult in its prime. A necropsy of the bear confirmed the gruesome truth. Human remains were found in its stomach. Villagers, enraged and grief-stricken, took a form of revenge by later dismembering and eating the bear's meat, an act meant to quote-unquote settle the score with the man-eater. Ultimately, the villagers had come to believe that the bear was a supernatural force, and the village was largely abandoned in the years that followed. Interestingly, a 6-year-old boy who witnessed the bear attacks, Haruyoshi Okawa, vowed revenge on bears as a whole. Over the course of his life, he went on to claim the lives of 102 Ussuri brown bears. The Sankabetsu incident naturally raised the question, why did this particular bear behave so aggressively and persistently? Several theories and contributing factors have been discussed by historians and wildlife experts. Many believe the bear woke up from hibernation early due to hunger. An underfed bear emerging in early winter would be exceptionally ravenous and prone to bold attacks. Indeed, the initial encounters in November 1915 suggest the animal was scrounging for food, raiding corn stores, when most bears should have been denned for the winter. However, others have pointed out that the bear weighed 750 pounds, indicating that the animal wasn't as underfed as some would like to claim. While hunger may have set the stage, human actions likely exacerbated the bear's aggression. Notably, the bear did not harm any people during its first appearances. It fled after stealing corn, until it was shot and wounded by villagers on November 30th. Another factor is that the bear was an exceptionally large male in the prime of life, which likely contributed to its confidence in taking on humans. Ussuri brown bears are among the largest brown bear subspecies and are nearly comparable to North American grizzlies in size and strength. Another factor was the recent encroachment by humans into the area at the time. In a somewhat bizarre turn of events, today the site is home to the Sankabetsu Brown Bear Incident Reconstruction Site. Tourists can come visit the area and see giant statues and reconstructions of the bear terrorizing the villagers. Imagine a vast island appearing on old maps, only to vanish when explorers went to find it. New South Greenland was one such phantom island, a phantom landmass that captured imaginations in the 19th century. Its story is a fascinating tale of exploration, error, and the enduring allure of the unknown. A phantom island is essentially a geographic mirage, an island once reported and charted, but later proven not to exist. These are, in essence, the ghost stories of cartography. Many arose during the Age of Sail, when explorers with primitive navigation tools miscalculated positions or were fooled by illusions at sea. Fog banks, floating ice, or tricks of light could make open ocean look like distant land. Eager sailors announced new discoveries, and mapmakers dutifully added them to their charts. Some phantom islands persisted for years or even centuries before being quote-unquote undiscovered. The tale of New South Greenland begins in March 1823 in the icy seas off Antarctica. American Captain Benjamin Morrell was commanding the schooner Wasp on a sealing voyage. They were exploring the virtually uncharted Weddell Sea when his crew sighted something that looked like a coastline to the west. Elated, Morrell steered toward this apparent shore and followed it for several days, mapping as he went. By his estimate, the Wasp traced over 300 miles of continuous coastline. The shores were visible with high mountains beyond. The island was teeming with life, including flocks of seabirds and thousands of seals, convincing Morrell that a substantial new land lay before him. Believing he had encountered a new extension of Antarctica, or perhaps a large island, Morrell named the supposed land New South Greenland. He carefully recorded coordinates for its capes and bays, then turned north as winter ice closed in. It's important to note this winter ice element, since the Wasp never directly made landfall on the island due to safety reasons. Back in port, Morrell published his account of this discovery, sparking a stir in geographic circles. If true, he had found a huge unknown land at the bottom of the world. Some maps even began depicting a vague coastline or a blank space labeled New South Greenland in that region. Not everyone accepted Morrell's claim. The captain already had a reputation for either exaggeration or a lack of competence, or both, depending on the source. Simply put, he wasn't the most reliable witness to begin with, but his crew had also witnessed the supposed new land as well, bolstering his claim substantially. In 1838, French explorer Jules Dumont d'Urville sailed to the coordinates of New South Greenland's supposed northern cape to check for himself. He found nothing but empty ocean and drifting ice where the coast should have been. This stark failure bolstered skeptics' belief that Morrell's land was a mistake, perhaps a mirage of distant ice or a navigational error. Morrell might have been off course, or maybe he saw an illusion that looked like solid ground. Yet the phantom refused to fade away, and in 1843, the respected British explorer Sir James Clark Ross reported sighting a hazy appearance of land in the same general area of the Weddell Sea. In the view of many contemporaries, This took the claim from an unreliable sighting by a captain with a shoddy reputation to just short of established geographic fact. Ross couldn't get closer due to heavy pack ice, but his glimpse of a distant misty mountain on the horizon kept the mystery alive a while longer. For the rest of the 19th century, the Weddell Sea remained a blank space, its phantom islands unverified. The final verdict on New South Greenland came with the dawn of the 20th century, when Antarctic expeditions at last probed this remote region. In 1912, Wilhelm Filchner led a German voyage into the Weddell Sea, specifically to hunt for the rumored land. By chance, Filchner's ship, the Deutschland, became trapped in pack ice and drifted near Morell's reported coordinates. Seizing the opportunity, Filchner's team journeyed over the ice in search of any shoreline. They saw none, only unbroken white sea ice in every direction. To be sure, they drilled through the ice and measured the ocean depth below. The water proved to be thousands of feet deep, far too deep for any landmass. Filchner concluded that New South Greenland had never existed, except perhaps as an optical illusion. However, due to the upcoming conflict that was about to engulf the world, this wasn't widely reported at the time. Further confirmation came in 1915 from Sir Ernest Shackleton during his Endurance expedition. Also stuck in the Weddell Sea ice, Shackleton's crew witnessed the same mirage-like phenomenon. They witnessed distant, towering shapes that looked like land, which then eventually faded away. They were seeing a polar mirage known as a fata morgana, which bends light to conjure phantom islands on the horizon. Soundings again found only deep ocean where land was supposed to be. Shackleton concluded that Morell's version of Greenland was nothing more than ice and vapor, effectively ending this mystery that once haunted the Southern Ocean.